still.
This is one of the things they had in the camp. Look at this. Oh, suitcases. Look at that.
He was such quizás que le roban todos los equipos del gobierno mexicano, porque hacía ver que
Jeez. Sad what they did. Did the Japanese get an apology from the government for what they did?
Right already.
Living here and being separated because yeah. I was hearing about this and they're saying they can't vote in Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, they can vote here. Yeah, exactly.
Collateral damage. So anyways, I'm gonna have lunch with you, but I'll come by about 1 o'clock. Oh yeah. Hey, how's it going, man? All right.
Next, we have a very special guest who came up from Southern California to be with us this evening. Dr. Francisco Balderrama is a professor emeritus of U.S. History and Chicano Studies at Cal State, Los Angeles. He is also co-author of Decade of Betrayal, Mexican Repatriation in the 1930s, along with the late Raymond Rodriguez. Dr. Balderrama has spent many years educating the public about what happened to Mexican Americans in the 1930s, when a campaign based on fear and hate mongering led to an estimated 1 million being deported in violation of the U.S. Constitution, and an estimated 60 to 70% U.S.-born children. He was involved supporting efforts to get the state of California to issue a formal apology for this role in repatriation and mass deportations of Mexican Americans, which it did so in 2006, I believe. So without any further ado, this is Dr. Francisco Balderrama.
Can you all hear me? Yes. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. This is my second time here, and I really appreciate the invitation to be with all of you today. I have an assistant, okay, my spouse, Christine Valenciana, who also has done considerable work on this same topic. And so we are not only husband and wife, but we're also colleagues working on this topic. So you know we have a really strong marriage. We talk about exclusion, and what I'd like to focus upon tonight is really what happens to men, women, and children. And that we are seeing an attack on family life, historically and contemporarily. Many people are familiar with what happened to Black Americans, African Americans in terms of slavery and the divisions of their families. Some people are also familiar with what happened to Native Americans and how those families were separated and their children were placed in boarding camps. What we have here is the case of Jorge Garcia, which just happened last January. Jorge Garcia, a resident of Detroit for 30 years, who came to the United States at 9 years old, who's married to a U.S. citizen, who has children who are U.S. citizens, found himself being deported. He was too old to apply for DACA. We have an individual who's paid his taxes, has maintained a job, supported a family of U.S. citizens, finding himself today in Mexico, separated from his family. And with the threat of that family never seeing their father again. Christine, if we could have the next slide, thank you. Here is Esteban Torres, former congressman of the Southern California area, also very active in union politics in Southern California. Esteban Torres was raised in Arizona, in the mining districts of Arizona, and at 3 years old, during the Great Depression, his father was rounded up and shipped to Mexico. He grew up without his father. This happened during the 1930s, when we find a mass expulsion of Mexican nationals and American citizens of Mexican descent. Our next slide, please. This is Ramona Espinosa, who was deported from Los Angeles also during the 1930s, when her father was in jail, arrested for a traffic accident. Her mother and her siblings were on their way to Mexico. She would live 10 years in Mexico without her father. She also suffered all sorts of deprivations, starvations at certain points in life, also developed stomach problems because she was forced to drink water from containers that had once held gasoline. Next slide, please. Click again. Okay. This is Jose Lopez. Jose Lopez, gratefully we could say, went to Mexico with the rest of his family. Living in Detroit, Michigan, his father found himself out of work, and the county there says, you have to go to Mexico where you can be with your own people, where you can speak your own language. But as we all know, you can do that in Detroit. Right? This poor man experienced malnutrition, experienced child labor, lived in poverty for 10 years, finally was able to return to the United States during World War II, trying to join the military, but was a 4F, which was a result of his living in these conditions in Mexico. His life project became, what happened? Why did it happen to my family? And he became a crusader in terms of bringing justice to the over 1 million Mexican nationals and American citizens of Mexican descent that were expelled at that time. Key at looking at this is this anti-Mexican hysteria. Basically revolved around the idea at that time that a Mexican is a Mexican. No distinction made in terms of residence. Most of the people during the 1930s that were expelled had lived in the United States for 15, 20, 25 years, and it contributed to the U.S. economy. Also, no distinction made to those that were U.S. citizens. So what we have occurring is an unconstitutional deportation of U.S. citizens. Over 70% of them were U.S. citizens. Expulsion by train, that was the means to do it. Key to looking at this in terms of, as we look at today, and as it occurs to Jorge Garcia and others, is this simple fact. It was less the federal government There was no Deportation Act by the federal government, which is the responsibility of the federal government to control borders and enforce immigration laws. Rather, what occurred in the 1930s is it occurred on the local level. Your private industry, U.S. Steel, Southern Pacific Railroad, Ford Motor Company, decided to ship people because they'd be better off with their own people in Mexico. And your local states and counties sought to ship people. Similar, for those of you familiar with immigration law and recent developments, when the states under the Obama administration of Arizona and Alabama sought to enforce immigration laws, that's what occurred. Whether it be the New Dealers under Roosevelt, or the conservative or the Republicans, they both groups, the right and the left, supported this. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the key factor, is U.S. citizens are deported. 70% were U.S. citizens, as I said. And that obviously played a key role in the Mexican community in the development of Americanization. So as we can think of this time is, it's a lost generation. A lost generation. Some people are going to be able to return, but it's few of them. Their lives are disrupted. Totally disrupted. Next slide, please. Raymond Rodriguez, as Tom mentioned to you, co-authors of Decade of Betrayal, was a very, very close friend and not just a colleague of mine. One of my trusted great friends. We knew each other for over 40 years. We worked together for about 25 years together. I worked with him on Decade of Betrayal, the first edition of the book that came out in the 90s. And I had known him and his family very, very well. I knew he grew up without his father, but when we finished the manuscript, he told me, my father was a repatriate. That his father had been shipped to Mexico. He was raised alone by his mother, together with his other siblings. And writing that book was most obviously a search for his father. Next slide, please. It resulted in the 1995 edition of the book. The book was a great success, adopted in a number of universities. I was very, very happy with it. And then the years went by. I was working on another project, and a state senator from Southern California, Orange County, Joe Dunn, read the book. And he started calling me, leaving messages, and many of you know about the fame of Orange County, kind of conservative area. He left me a lot of messages, and I didn't answer them. And finally, then I picked up the phone once, he caught me in the office, and there he was. We got to do something about this. I've never heard about this. Well, ended up, he was a Democrat that represented Santa Ana, okay, with its huge Mexican population. And next slide, please. We were able to get, with Joe Dunn's help, legislation passed, an apology by the state of California for the expulsion that occurred in this state. And we have a memorial of that in Los Angeles at the LA Plaza Museum. There's also an exhibit there with oral history testimony from many of the survivors and many of those Mexican Americans that were U.S. citizens. Next. And this is one individual, Amelia Castaneda. And I mention her because I'm just a poor historian conveying what happened. But as this museum does here, it's the testimony, it's the voices of those individuals, is the power of the story. And Amelia Castaneda, that was found herself expelled here, a U.S. citizen, I'm about to say deported, better yet, unconstitutionally deported. She was one of the leaders, speaking on television, on radio, interviews of the Spanish language press and the English press. It's voices like this that really got us the apology and the exhibit. These voices. Next slide, please. As well, I'd like to recognize, but there's many others, Ignacio Pino, an individual that at 6 years old, he was looking forward with a brand new pair of jeans and a good pair of shoes to start school, like his older brothers and sisters living out in Idaho. And the sheriffs were at the door. They rounded up in custody. They placed him in jail. They rounded up his father. And interestingly enough, they put the father in one cell, in one part of the jail, and they put his mother and his brothers and sisters in another cell. And they're separated for a week or so with only the clothes on their backs. After a week, they find themselves on a train being shipped. They ask for the belongings, and they said, don't worry about it, we're going to ship them to you. They end up in Ciudad Juarez and wait days and nothing comes. What's amazing with this individual is that he always remembered where he came from. He always remembered, like Amelia Castaneda, that they were from the U.S., that they were Americans, that they did not belong in Mexico. And it's their voices saying that story which brought about the apology. And it also tells us a lot about what an American is about. We revised and expanded the book, Ray and myself, to talk about this campaign for justice, and as a result of so many individuals that came forward to share their stories. Their stories of what happened to these men, women, and children. What happened to their families. Yes, we can talk about the laws, yes, we can talk about the politics, but I think if we look at the families themselves, that's the importance of it. Next slide. And this is a reflection of the power of the story. Right here you see the children of Bell Gardens Elementary School from Southern California. Bell Gardens Elementary School, there's a teacher there, a 5th grade teacher named Leslie Hyatt, and she read Decade of Betrayal, and she became engaged with the topic, and she thought about her students in the 5th grade, and thought about, well, what would resonate with them? What would they like? And she introduced the topic to them and gave them the choice. Do you want us to give more attention to this topic? So these students started working on the topic. They developed groups, they developed plays on the topic, they developed skits on the project, etc., etc. And this teacher happened to go to a school board meeting and talk to one of the school board members that happens to be a former student of mine. I have former students everywhere, okay, and one right here. And, you know, it said, well, gee, I know Francisco. So I got an invitation to the classroom. Myself, my spouse, Dr. Valenciana, and survivors, we came to the classroom. And I tell you, Christine could speak to you maybe more about this later, but for myself, I was so impressed. Those 5th graders knew more than my graduate students. Because that was a topic that resonated with them. Because they come from families of immigrants. That they themselves became captivated by that topic. Because for them, they live in that reality. And so, the local assembly person of Southern California then had a contest, this ought to be a law. And that's what took them to Sacramento. Those 5th graders that you see right there gave testimony that this ought to be taught. in California schools. Now, myself and Dr. Valenciana and survivors have gone to Sacramento before, but when these children went and they gave testimony, 4 of them, 5th graders, spoke to an audience at least 5 times bigger than this one, gave testimony of 3 minutes each, and each child of that class came up to an open microphone and declared their support. My God, 5th graders, how powerful. Resulted in the passage of that legislation, and then other professionals, historians, Chicano scholars, and others, educators, also changed the framework. So you'll see it in textbooks that are being released. Not enough. Okay, we got our qualms with it. But we're in there. We need to expand it. We need to do better with it. So now we have the textbook fight. Well, now we have the textbook fight. But so relevant and so important. Next one. Okay, this is the future. We've talked about children here being caught in this situation. So I'm leaving you with this one child from the 5th grade class here and the role that she played. And I leave you with that because of my research and writing. Frequently I get asked the question, well, Dr. Balderrama, well, what do you think about it happening again? And what can we do? And usually my response is, well, we have coalitions. Coalitions in groups. Coalition in groups with other ethnic groups, like what we're doing here today, with Japanese Americans, with others, with African Americans, etc., etc. Groups on the left, different labor groups coming together, shared ground, shared experiences, organizing to stop it. But what I think has been most powerful is these children. If we educate others, especially children, to understand that doing this to one group is wrong, and especially it's been done to so many other groups. When I began, I mentioned African Americans. I mentioned Native Americans. Obviously, with our focus here in this sacred ground here, this museum, Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans. We can go down the list, right? That's our common ground. So with that, I leave you. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. And we got kind of a twofer here with your wife and both of you. We really appreciate it. We are going to now have a panel discussion. And I'm going to introduce the panelists. We have, of course, Francisco, but I already introduced him, and so you know who he is. We also have Ammad Rafiqi. He's from the Council on American Islamic Relations, or also known as CAIR, a Civil Rights and Legal Services Coordinator. He represents the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of CAIR, which is the oldest chapter in the country. CAIR was created to work to uphold civil rights of American Muslims, foster a better understanding of Islamic faith and its followers, and help find avenues for Muslims to integrate more fully into the broader society. CAIR provides legal services, educational outreach, and conducts advocacy work. CAIR is now at the forefront of defending Muslim American community in face of the massive upsurge of attacks upon them through the Trump administration. It seems that not a day goes by without CAIR having to respond through the media. And next to me here is a longtime activist in the San Jose Japanese American community, former chair of the Nihon Machi Committee, active in the movement for winning redress and reparations for Japanese Americans. She is also the former vice chair of the Federal Level Civil Liberties Public Education Fund Board, established by the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. which was set up to educate the public about the issues of the wartime expulsion and incarceration. Susan is also a volunteer board member with the Santa Clara Valley chapter of the ACLU of Northern California. So we can give our panel a hand here. So what I'd like to start off with is to give, you have heard from Dr. Balderrama. I'd like to give our two new panelists a chance to say something. So first I'd like to ask Ammad to help us start the discussion off. If Ammad, could you please help us connect the Muslim American experience to what you have heard this evening? Are there any stories you'd like to share from your work that might help us understand what is happening to Muslim Americans right now?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for the Japanese American Museum of San Jose for having us here. I guess it's been quite a reflective few minutes for me hearing about the stories of those who survived the concentration camps, of those who have family members who survived the repatriation, or heard from family members like Professor Balderrama. And I guess a few things have struck out in some of the work that our organization has been doing lately and for the last few decades. And one of those things was how the state apparatus is used to vilify, target, demonize certain groups, and there always seems to be a flavor of the month, whether it is Italian Americans or Jewish Americans, Japanese Americans, and so the list goes on, like Professor Balderrama rightly said. And it's often interesting that it often starts at the top with politicians, for example, using and leveraging the current flavor of the month. And I use this, and I was having a brief conversation with Professor Balderrama about this. It's interesting to me, especially with the Japanese American experience, that wartime often tends to be a very, very good time to pick domestic enemies, quote unquote. In the Second World War, it was the nation of Japan that the United States had declared itself at war with. And so it chose to see Japanese Americans as not quite American. With the Mexican American experience, with the sort of land battles with Mexico, including the land that we currently are in, you see again the demonization of Mexican Americans as not quite American. And now with this sort of nameless, shapeless war on terror that tends to encapsulate mostly Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, South Asian communities, or MMSA as we like to say it for short, to see them as sort of this fifth column. I use this word to say not quite American. So we see this the same. We see from the politicians who use the same terms to describe Muslim Americans as being traitors, not American. The idea that Muslims have to be loyal to something other than the country, something more than, say, for example, their neighbors. The same idea was used to Japanese Americans, that they were loyal to Japan as an imperial power or to their religion. And I think one of the stories mentioned taking away of shrines. You see this quite often with, for example, the FBI, when they visit the homes of Muslim Americans, and they look at sort of symbols of the faith and deem that to be something foreign, something dangerous. It could be something simple as a copy, a calligraphy that says the word God, or the name of the Prophet Muhammad, for example. And so it's interesting to see how those simple images have been weaponized. What also struck me was this idea that you could sort of use exclusionary policies to further domestic goals. And so we've seen that in the separation of families. We have family members who are no longer able to reunite with family members. We know people who who are U.S. citizens and wanted to bring their spouses from overseas, from one of the countries, for example, targeted by the Muslim ban, and they're separated and they're struck in those conditions. I speak of a family in Oakland of Yemeni origin, so the Yemeni Americans. All 8 siblings are here in America, and so are the parents. And one sister was stuck in Yemen. And then, if for those of you who paid attention, the Yemeni civil war, often conducted by America's great ally, Saudi Arabia, and funded by American dollars, for example, closed the embassy in Yemen. And this family is now stuck outside of Yemen with no hopes of going back. It's not so much that America has been home to them already, but the truth is, simply by the fact that their family members, all their family members are here, there is nowhere else on earth that they could find sort of the comfort, the support that we all look for in family. And so It's been interesting for me working in these cases and speaking to people about the parallel experiences of those who come before as Japanese Americans, Mexican Americans, to know that it's not so much just the flavor of the month, but that this is something we've seen before. The ways to defeat this are seen before. It's powerful to build coalitions. It's powerful for us to speak about this. So it's also important to know that without us being heard, you will often not have politicians sort of make any moves. California has prided itself as being a sanctuary state, but we know that's not quite true. We know that ICE, for example, has conducted many raids in Northern California. I'm reminded, and I'll just end with this, I'm reminded that Justice Earl Warren, when he ran for California Attorney General, then prided himself. He's known as one of the most liberal justices of the Supreme Court. And I not grew up, but I went to law school hearing about him and learning about it. But he actually ran his campaign on kicking Japanese Americans out of California. That's a liberal justice. He went on to become the Attorney General and then the governor. And this is a reminder, like Professor Balderrama said, that it doesn't matter whether it's liberal, conservative coalitions or politicians, but the important thing is that the people themselves need to be separated. And I think it's important to understand America as an empire in the world and to separate that from the American people. And so I think that's sort of what I've had to take away from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ammad. Susan, would you like to say something?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm third generation Japanese American, and I think that, like many sansei, I grew up knowing my family's story. So, you know what the thing is that everybody else knows. They know 110,000 Japanese Americans were taken from their homes and on the West Coast. But I think what we really take to heart and really think about a lot is our individual family stories and the individual family tragedies and suffering that came out of the camps. And because of that, I think we're very, all our tear ducts are ready to go when we hear stories like Judo's family story. It means so much to us, we can relate to it really personally. And so I think we're really ready to have deep compassion for other people's family stories. And sometimes when we hear things on the news and we hear a news analysis, we kind of understand it, we sympathize with it, we feel angry or we feel we should support something or oppose something. But I think what really touches us deeply is knowing that some of the really fundamental things that Japanese Americans have gone through with our families, that there are other families that have gone through that too. And that is, that's something that is very moving to me, and I think it's very powerful. And I want to figure out how to take that power and really turn it into something big.
Thank you, Susan. We're going to, before we start with a question and answer, regular question and answer, we're going to do something a little bit unusual to try to encourage people to participate. We're going to pass the basket. But I'm not going to ask for money. This is not that kind of basket. In this basket I have flowers and praise. They're supposed to be symbolic. And Judy over here, Judy Dang, made them. And attached them as a question, each one. And if you're willing to do this, you can read the question and we'll have you comment and other people can comment on this. But we're going to give some special preference to special guests here first. The first are these. If any of you here were incarcerated in one of the camps or detention centers, would you like to say something about it?
Yeah, sure, of course, yes.
I'm a professor and I don't give quizzes at these events, okay? So there'll be no examination. I guess what I would like people from today to kind of be sensitive to from coming here, and I really do appreciate you coming out and being here and spending your time to address this issue, because it's not just a Mexican issue, it's not just a Latino issue, it's an American issue for all of us. It's a universal thing. I think to be conscious of hysteria. I think as we think about what happens to all these different people at different historical moments. There's an hysteria that breaks out. And people aren't making sense with their arguments, and their arguments don't make any sense. And there's a trampling of laws, there's a trampling of traditions. And the second thing is to be also ready to recognize when there's a lack of political leadership. And I think that's obvious. Right? You know, you walk out and check the news as you walk out of here. It's going to be some other thing, right? The Trump administration, you know, some people were saying that something's happening every day that's crazy. Well, I think it's now every morning, afternoon, and evening. So I think we have to recognize those things. And then thirdly, you know, you fought the traffic, you had to look for parking, you had to park the car, you had to get up here. Maybe some of you ate your dinner quickly, or maybe some of you are still hungry, thinking about when's it going to end so I can eat something. Well, you're here, and I really appreciate that. But use this to, you know, fuel everything that's been said here, these stories that we've shared here, of the different groups, different people, today and yesterday, the different ethnicities, and do something. Do something. That demonstration that you got on the calendar and said, I don't know, I don't want to go. Maybe not now. Do it. Write that letter. Send that donation for that candidate, that political party, that group. Do something. You'll feel good. Do something.
I think that there's something that we could learn from the repatriation experience. So for Japanese Americans and also for Chinese Americans, I think our experience is, okay, all of you out, right? Everybody was taken at the same time, or everybody was excluded. So I think what we can learn from the repatriation is that it's still an injustice, even if not every single person is taken, right? Because I think, so with, same thing with the deportations now and the deportations then, it wasn't like they rounded up every single last person, but it's still an attack on your people, an attack on your community, right? And I think for Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans, our experience was a little bit more straightforward, right? It was like everybody on the West Coast, or everybody's excluded from entry, right? So I think that's something that we should think about, that don't get caught up, you know, don't get stuck on that issue, right? I think that the deportations are part of this demonization, right? And that's one thing that, you know, sometimes people say, oh, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and suddenly everybody hated the Japanese. But I think, you know, there were decades of anti-Japanese hatred, and there were decades of anti-Mexican hatred. And there have, by this time, been decades of anti-Muslim, anti-Arab American hatred. And I think that when that is happening all the time, it makes it easy to do something to that people in that group. So I think that's something that I think is a lesson.
Okay, we're going to pass the basket one more time. This time, is anyone here related to someone, you personally, who was deported or directly impacted by the repatriation campaigns described by Dr. Balderrama? Wow. So let's give them a hand, please. Which of you would like to take a question? Do you mind reading it?
While we're recording. If we all join together, we could be stronger, so what keeps us apart?
If you'd like to say a comment on that, or we can have the panel.
But I really appreciate, since February I came to the events in remembrance of Executive Order 9066, and seeing the conversation revolve around the issue not only of the concentration camps on Japanese Americans, but as well as the current detention centers that are being used on the immigrant population, and how that is so much related for many Japanese Americans that were speaking on that day about how they were feeling the same emotions as they see right now the people being rounded up into these deportation centers. And I teach in the Salinas Valley, and for me, working with my students, it's very painful. My great-grandpa was repatriated from Valencia, Arizona, and a lot of my family ended up in Jalisco. And, you know, like I look at the lives of my children, and how, you know, today, you know, our brown youth continue to be criminalized. You know, in the Salinas Valley, we keep on having meetings with our parents and our students. I have students coming up to me asking me, Ms. Barrera, what documents do I need to fill out in case my parents don't make it home? And I have to call the school district asking them, like, what do I tell my students, you know, and, you know, because of legality, we're not able to give them, you know, the advice. And so now the school districts are creating these meetings where they're creating packets for the parents in case of deportations, and it's very painful. You know, in the Salinas Valley, we have our farm working communities, and, you know, for me, I appreciate what the Japanese American community is doing by having these workshops and having these conversations, because it's very much needed in the communities that I serve, and I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. We really appreciate it. Would anybody on the panel like to make a comment?
Personally, I'd like to just let it stand on its own. It's very powerful, and I really appreciate you sharing that.
Do you have any, let's open it up to questions. So anybody have a question they might ask?
The question I have is, you know, when we were fighting for redress, we focused on Congress. And it seems as though the focus should be on the Supreme Court, that we should draw to their attention, because they're about to make a decision on DACA, which is just a small part of the history that has gone on this country. And I don't know that the Supreme Court is aware of America's history. And they should be made aware if they're not aware. And I think we should do it immediately, because they're going to make a very important decision. But the bottom line of all the problems in America, I believe, is racism. You know, who is an American? You know,
Right.
and our president has described an American as being white, Anglo-Saxon, and rich. If you're poor,
Yes.
if you're other than white, you're not desirable. And we're allowing him to make that description. But I think our first battle should be focused on the Supreme Court, because they're about to make a decision.
Well, I think your comment is very, very important. That you made the comment that rich and white, and when you say white, we're not including white trash, because those people are not white. And I think what we're talking about is that ordinary people, working class people, are not a part of the administration, only being used as a way to get votes, okay, but not serving those interests. Yes, at the Supreme Court, there's been a history. If you think of the cases that have gone before the Supreme Court, many of the lawyers have had to educate the Supreme Court. So if we go back and look at the legal history of different cases that have come, that a lot of people don't understand that. And I think that's going to be part of it. But we all know the composition of the Supreme Court. We all know what happened with the Obama power of trying to appoint somebody to the Supreme Court, and the new appointee of the Supreme Court. We all know the balance of the Supreme Court. I think the only thing we can think about, I think, is that the only thing I wake up and think about is the election of 2018. And I think that's what has to be done. I mean, that's the only thing. You know, I mean, I think that's it. And the power in Congress, that's all we got going. And I think, you know, resistance has to be done on that level. Frankly, in terms of this particular issue of repatriation and getting it addressed, at one time we did have sponsors in Congress. We did have people that were pushing it, but the environment in Congress is not going to be supportive of anything like that. And so that's what we're left with. But that's where institutions like this are so important. Museums like this, classrooms as well, all other areas, because we have to continue to educate people, inform people, and move people towards activism. So as many of you know, because you live lives like that, activism is struggle. And that's just a part of it. But the rewards, you know, can be great.
You know, Tom and I went to the World War Jerome pilgrimage a couple weekends ago, and they asked us to give a workshop on the Redress Movement. And one of the things that Tom and I were both involved in the Redress Movement in the 1980s. And one of the things that Japanese Americans, who are a very tiny minority, had to do at the beginning of the Reagan era, which is, you know, a move to the right, we realized that we had to create as powerful a movement as we could to activate the most people in our community to come out and testify in front of the commission, and to really mobilize as many people, and to also build coalitions with other people. So I kind of think that a lot of us are kind of poised on the edge of something, because, you know, with this election and with the rise of anti-immigrant fervor that hits everybody, even if we're American citizens, I think that people more and more are realizing that we have to do something, right? And I think the reason that we wanted to have a forum like this is so that we could meet each other outside of our own communities, meet each other and try to figure out what we could do together and be more powerful than we would have been if we just stayed in our little group. So I hope that we can have conversations and meet each other and try to brainstorm.
Question.
Well, I just wanted to, because my father actually lived in Tijuana. He was a Mexican citizen, and he was there when the Mexicans were thrown back over the border. And he was a young child at the time, so I thought his story you would share something. I mean,
You know, attending this particular event is very symbolic to me, because I was fortunate enough to be born and raised in Tijuana, which is right across the border. But some of the things that people talk about, they really hit my heart. And, you know, because there's so much injustice in this world that is really pathetic. I have a lot of good friends that went to school with me in Tijuana, and they were Japanese descent. You know, these families, they had beautiful farms from Tijuana all the way up to La Paz. And I was so sad when suddenly, well, there's a lot of other points, you know, right now I'm speaking about the Japanese, but I noticed that the United States decided to gather all the Japanese and put them in concentration camps. Well, guess what? The politicians in Mexico are so rotten that they decided that it was a good move, you know, for the United States to do that, because Mexico was in danger. We had to put all the Japanese somewhere. Well, The only reason behind that purpose was to take their properties, to take over their land. When they sent the Japanese and put them in concentration camps here, they did the same thing in Mexico. But all the politicians that we knew for a fact that they were corrupt, they took over their properties, their lands, their business, everything, because they were helping the movement to control and to safeguard the continent. That was a lot of crap, you know, and I was one of the first ones, you know, when I was in school, I was just a kid, you know, and when I saw some of my young friends disappear, you know, I started telling the teachers, I said, no, wait a second, you know, how come you guys never talk about this? This is injustice, this is not human. Why do you guys allow it? Nobody says nothing. I said, well, you gotta keep quiet. Because here you're going to be classified as a radical. And in Mexico, we don't need people that are radicals or speak against our own government. And I said, well, you know what? I don't give a damn. You guys can put me in jail if you want to, but we gotta use our common sense and our conscience. We have to learn to respect. Well, the same thing happens with a lot of the Mexicans that I met when I was going to school. Just listen. Some kids in the school with me, 7, 8, 9 years old, they were all Mexican looking. And they were, I was asking, you're new here in the school. I speak to them in Spanish, of course, you know. ¿De qué parte eres? ¿Por qué no hablas español? What? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Yeah, you don't understand because you're ashamed to be a Mexican. You don't want to be. Don't be ashamed. I mean, we are a proud race here. Don't speak Spanish. And then they incorrectly would say, yo no era mexicano. I'm not a Mexican. They say, oh yeah, sure, you're not a Mexican, you're not blonde looking, you know. Well, anyway, these things happened and I saw them and they never leave my heart or my mind. Some of my best friends in Mexico were Japanese. And when I went to Mexico City to study, I was walking on one of the main avenues in Mexico. And I was walking with my mom. And then I said, Mom, there's Sergio Nonaka. He was a Japanese kid that went with me to school. And he says, Mijo, he's in a concentration camp, you know, don't even deal with him. And I said, Mama, I don't give a damn, you know, what anybody thinks, this is wrong. So I called him, and he came over and we hugged each other. And then I said, so what are you doing here, Sergio? He says, I'm in a concentration camp. And so is my family, but they allow me to come out and beg for money so I can give it to them. And I said, oh boy. You know, Mother, I said, Mother, let's take Sergio with us. I said, Mijo, we can't go against the government, we can't do that. He has to stay here. Well, I never saw him again. But you know, those things, honest to God, you know, they still hurt me. I can't believe it, so much cruelty, you know, in the world. And how can human beings be like that? It was incredible. We, like me, making fun of some of the Mexicans that were deported over there and they couldn't speak Spanish. Well, they had a reason, but I didn't understand it. And it was, well, that's about all I can say. Thank you for allowing me.
I think what we'll do is take one more either comment or question. Anybody have one? Oh, Connie?
You know, I really appreciate the message of all the panelists and everyone here, and it is that we all have to do something, that activism comes from in all forms. I have a specific thing, since we talk about the election being so important. You know, we have to do something about voter education and getting people to register. We must, and to let people know that naturalized immigrants have the right to vote. You know, and anyway, I'd like to just ask you you know, what could be done and what is being done on this, in this area.
Well, I don't know, I know that there are a lot of immigration attorneys working with immigrants, and a lot of people are applying for citizenship. But I don't know if there is a lot of new citizen voter ed, actually. I don't know about that.
No, there is.
Yeah.
There is, yes.
Oh,
Would
would you-
Speak to it.
No, No, I belong to a community organization called PAC. I don't know if any of you know that. People acting in community together. And we're a really diverse group. We have every ethnic group, every religion that come together. And every time we have elections coming up, we go out and register people. So we've registered a lot of people. We have more than 50,000 families in this area that belong to that. So when we have an action or we have an issue, we form an action and we all come together, and it really makes a difference, working together, which is what we're saying we should do. So we're doing that right now.
Great.
I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
I was going to say that I feel like new citizens are probably the first ones that go vote, actually. It's the people who have been here for a while, the second, third, fourth generations. To me, the best way you can push voting is to tell to all your family members and everybody you work with and ask them, are you voting? Are you voting? And I don't care if you gotta shame them about it, because it's these people that don't vote. It's the new citizens are usually very proud to vote, and they're the first ones there. But it's a lot of your own children and your own siblings and family members that are not voting, so talk to them.
Hi, Consuelo Rodriguez, Doctora Consuelo Rodriguez, UCLA graduate. Three things. Yes, we've got to get out there, and my dear friend Betty Martinez is getting a group going together and getting them to register. And we have to go out and get the people that are afraid to come out. Not just us here, but those that are, reach out. The second thing is I'm on the board of La Raza Historical Society. And one of the things we're doing is documenting the contributions of the La Raza people to this community, because we found out nationally that they didn't recognize, in the comments were that, well, what did Mexicans and Latinos contribute to the growth and processing of this valley? What did Mexicans contribute to this valley? So that's part of our organization, to document, to collect data, to collect information, and hopefully we'll have a museum, hopefully taking. The third thing is I'd like to open another area, the racism. We have to look at racism, but we have to also look at classism. And I, fortunately, at UCLA studied under Dr. Charles Cheng. And Dr. Cheng died much too early. And when I heard him talk, I knew I wanted to study under him, because he said he would only work with change agents, activists. That's all he would work with on the doctoral program. And his philosophy is, if you're not going to go out there and make change so that this is a better world to live in, not just for your little family, but for all of us. If we're not all free, we're not free. So his issue was to look at classism, because the research he did, and if you look at the documents, in the Constitution, it demonstrates clearly the goal is upper class, lower class. Upper class, lower class. The problem we're having today is that us all, are now middle class. They weren't counting on that.
Thank you, Consuelo. What we're going to do now is we're going to transition into our reception. And you'll have a chance to ask questions of our panelists here and hopefully talk amongst yourselves. We are leading them out the emergency exit, so they will go down to the reception, so you guys won't trap them in here and not go to the reception yourself.